I was cut off on that last bit talking about this chemical bond that occurs. But again, what happens is the hydrogen breaks its bond with this carbon. This OH over here, oxygen and hydrogen, it's the oxygen breaks its bond with this carbon. Those two things then merge together. Hydrogen with OH forms H2O. So a water molecule is formed when this chemical bond occurs between this short polymer and this monomer, and that water just gets kicked out. And then a new chemical bond right here is formed between this carbon and that carbon. So this type of chemical reaction, forming a chemical bond where water is ejected or produced from this chemical reaction, is called a dehydration reaction because water is removed. So you can almost think about it as these molecules have lost water, so they've become dehydrated. So dehydration reaction links two molecules, or in this case two monomers, or a polymer and a monomer together, and water gets kicked out. Now, if it's a really long polymer, there's going to be many dehydration reactions that are linking in multiple monomers. So, cells, organisms can also break down larger molecules. They can break down chemical molecules basically by doing the opposite thing, by digestion reactions. So a chemical bond can be broken between these two carbon molecules, and during this cleaving of this chemical bond, water is required, and the water molecule gets split in half, gets split apart, and the OH gets linked to one carbon, and then the lone hydrogen gets linked to the other carbon, forming that chemical bond there. So this is referred to as a hydrolysis reaction. Okay? Digestion means break apart, but the breaking apart of this molecule with the input of water, or water requiring, is referred to as hydrolysis. Hydro for water, lysis meaning cut or break. So hydrolysis chemical reactions break bonds between monomers or between adjacent carbons in a larger molecule, and then smaller molecules are formed through this type of digestion reaction referred to as hydrolysis. So again, hydrolysis because water is required to break the chemical bond, or if you want to think about it, the water molecule itself is broken apart. Its chemical bonds are broken to form these two reactant molecules, product molecules from this original larger molecule. Okay? So it's the opposite of the hydration reaction where you're building larger molecules, water is kicked out. Larger molecules, like macromolecules, can be broken down into smaller molecules with the input of water through hydrolysis reactions. Okay, so let's look at this little short video on polymers. Get the volume up for you. Okay, here we go.
Most biological molecules are very large and are built by assembling small molecules, or monomers, into long chains. The resulting molecules are called macromolecules, or polymers. A process of linking monomers, called dehydration synthesis, involves the removal of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom to form water. One way this might happen is diagrammed here, where several generic monomers are shown with OH groups that could be used for linking. The animation illustrates the joining together of monomers by dehydration synthesis, catalyzed by a polymerase enzyme, and the reverse process, in which added water results in hydrolysis, catalyzed by a hydrolase enzyme.
And that's it. So the video here, the narrator talks about two assisting molecules, and we'll get into those later. But I will show them to you here quickly again.
Small molecules, or monomers into long chains. The resulting molecules are called macromolecules, or polymers. A process of...
So this purplish molecule coming in, it's a molecule coming in to help form this chemical bond through dehydrolysis reaction. This is a special protein that's called an enzyme. And we'll talk about that, when we get to proteins. But what enzymes do is they help speed up the rate or how fast chemical reactions occur. This chemical reaction to link these two monomers together either won't happen or will happen relatively slowly without the assistance of this type of enzyme. Oops, sorry, let me show you that again.
Most biological or polymers. A process of linking monomers, called dehydration synthesis, involves the removal of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom.
And then notice this enzyme is simply doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then the opposite, breaking down a larger molecule through hydrolysis reaction, is also facilitated by a different type of enzyme that's going to do the opposite.
To form water. One way this might happen is diagrammed here, where several generic monomers are shown with OH groups that could be used for linking. The animation illustrates the joining together of monomers by dehydration synthesis, catalyzed by a polymerase enzyme, and the reverse process, in which added water results in hydrolysis, catalyzed by a hydrolase enzyme.
So in this example, it's another enzyme, a different enzyme, that's doing the opposite of building a large molecule through dehydrolysis reactions. This is breaking down a larger molecule through hydrolysis reactions to produce the monomers. Okay? And both of these two molecules are specific types of proteins called enzymes. Okay. And okay, so let's get to the large biological molecules. The 4 large biological molecules, again, carbohydrates or sugars, lipids or fats, proteins, and then the nucleic acids, all carbon-based molecules. So we'll start with carbohydrates, carbs, also called sugars. They include the sugars, like the sugars that you consume in soft drinks, coffee, tea, etc., and polymers of smaller sugars that are the complex carbohydrates, things like in bread, pasta, grains, cereals, crackers, okay, chips, those sorts of things. Okay? These carbohydrates are either small, simple carbohydrates or larger, more complex carbohydrates. Okay? So, in animals, carbohydrates, carbs, are the primary source of our dietary energy. This 1' means primary source of our dietary enzymes, and carbohydrates are the raw material for making other kinds of organic molecules. So if you think of us in terms of the energy output that's required to do things like running, exercising, etc., right, studying biology, whatever it might be, most of the energy that we harness or most of the energy that we utilize is ultimately harnessed from the chemical breakdown of carbohydrates that we eat. And the larger the carbohydrates, usually the healthier the carbohydrates, in the sense of the large complex carbohydrates like cereals and grains and pasta are healthier for us versus the simpler carbohydrates that are like the sugars in our soft drinks. Okay? So in order for us to do what we need to do and to grow, well, we need energy from mostly carbs. However, think of a tree, a photosynthetic organism. It photosynthesizes, produces sugars through photosynthesis, and then the tree breaks down those sugars just the way we do, essentially, to harness energy for doing things like growth. So trees are made up of mostly carbohydrates, but they have proteins and lipids and nucleic acids. Where do they get the building blocks for proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids if they are not able to eat those in their diets? right? Photosynthesis only produces carbohydrates. So plants are actually pretty darn amazing. They're able to make the other organic molecules, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids from the carbohydrates that they produce themselves through photosynthesis. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? We, on the other hand, we can do this to a slight extent, but we normally make proteins from the proteins we ingest, lipids from the lipids that we ingest, that sort of thing. So if you haven't hugged a tree today, go run outside and do it right now. Okay? So in plants, carbohydrates are the building material for much of the plant body. They do absorb some essential minerals from the soil, but the bulk of what they need to grow massively, like this example, is from the carbohydrates they produce through photosynthesis and the conversion of those carbohydrates into the other biological molecules. So let's talk about the smaller, simpler sugars, and these are the cursor. Where are you? Monosaccharides. Mono for small, one unit building block. Mono for one. And saccharide is another term for sugar. So monosaccharides are also called simple sugars. And they are the building blocks, meaning the monomers of the larger carbohydrates. So a monomer is a general term. Okay, so if you have a small piece of a Lego, one Lego, and you put many of them together to make a big Lego spaceship or something, the individual pieces of Legos are called monomers, and the big old spaceship is called a polymer. Okay? But since we're talking about carbohydrates, the monomers of carbohydrates are monosaccharides, also called simple sugars. And they get chemically linked together through those dehydration reactions to form larger and larger molecules. So, for example, glucose in our sports drink, like Gatorade, and fructose, naturally occurring fruit sugar, also found in honey. These are examples of monomers of carbohydrates. These are monosaccharides or simple sugars. Here's a representation of the ring-type structure of glucose. It can be in a linear form, but when it's being used biologically, it forms a ring-type structure, and you can see where the carbons are. And this is just a shorthand version of writing it, a glucose molecule, and often we just even leave off that oxygen and just use a simple six-sided shape to indicate a monosaccharide. Okay? So monosaccharides like like glucose are the main fuels for our cellular work. When you eat foods, much of those foods are broken down into glucose or converted into glucose or something similar to glucose. And then that's what gets broken down at the mitochondria in your cells to produce ATP, and then that ATP is available to do our cellular work. Okay, so glucose should sound familiar. That's blood sugar. Our glucose in our bloodstreams is blood sugar. Okay, so disaccharides. Di meaning two, saccharides meaning sugars. So if we combine two monosaccharides, we get a disaccharide, like lactose, which is milk sugar. Okay? So disaccharide, a double sugar meaning a sugar made up of two monomers forming a disaccharide. For example, lactose through dehydration, right? Notice chemical bond is formed, water is kicked out, so that's a dehydration reaction that's linking two monosaccharides to form a disaccharide in this example here. Right? So example, lactose in milk, maltose in beer, or sucrose in plants, and our table sugar is sucrose. So high fructose corn syrup, which you may have heard about, is formed in the factory by converting natural glucose into corn syrup. Converting natural glucose that's found in corn syrup from corn into a much sweeter fructose, because we love our sugary drinks. And there have been health issues related to high fructose corn syrup.